All right, well, welcome again to everybody. My name is Megan. I work as a director of operations here at Forta. I'm going to be assisting with this webinar along with our wonderful BCBA, Mackenzie. So Mackenzie is a board certified behavioral analyst, also called a BCBA, and she has over 13 years of experience in the field. So we're very excited to have her here with us today. Mackenzie is going to be talking to us a little bit about managing challenging behaviors at home and avoiding burnout. Now, some things to note. Mackenzie and I are going to be monitoring the chats. So if you have any questions or if we go through something and you want more clarification or you would like to talk about something related to whatever it is that Mackenzie's discussing with us, please just post it in the chat. And as we see those come through, Mackenzie will pause and answer, or if you'd like to just keep your questions until the very end, that is absolutely okay as well. We will leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. But however you prefer to do it, that is up to you. But we will be monitoring those chats very regularly for any questions or comments. All right, without further ado, Mackenzie, take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic. So welcome. I'm glad that people could come and join us. I just wanted to start by saying parenting is hard. So if you're tired or overwhelmed or unsure, that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. And by the end of today, we're going to identify some simple, actionable strategies to provide some additional support. So this session is really going to be focusing on both supporting your child and protecting caregiver well-being, which is two very important sides of the same coin, in my opinion. It definitely doesn't mean perfect parenting. It means sustainable parenting or caregiving. So by the end of this webinar, we'll be able to identify some common causes of challenging behavior, apply some prevention strategies at home, respond to an escalation safely and effectively, and also use some strategies to kind of protect caregiver energy as well. First off, I cannot overstate this enough. You are not failing. If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel fatigue, burnout grows from unmanaged, chronic, long-term stress, usually stemming from overwhelming workload or feelings of lack of control. Burnout feeds off of guilt. It feeds off of unreasonable expectations. And challenging behaviors are not a sign of caregiver failing. Challenging behaviors are often signs that a child's overwhelmed, missing a skill, definitely, as you see here on the screen, influenced by neurology, skill gaps, sensory differences, environment fatigue, both yours and your child's. So I want everyone here to just take a breath, let that sink in for a second. I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward throughout this webinar. So let's start by kind of going over why challenging behavior happens. So by challenging behavior, I'm going to be referencing that a lot during the webinar. So I just wanted to clarify, I'm talking about behaviors that disrupt daily life, that are unsafe, or that are just excessively stressful. For example, if you've ever encountered tantrums at bedtime, refusals to get dressed, aggressions during transitions, or tantrums whenever electronics of any kind are removed. I'm sure that you've found yourself asking, what can we do to help make daily life run more smoothly and kind of get past some of these situations? So the first thing that I want to invite us to do is shift our mindset from only how do I stop this? And let's reframe to what is my child trying to communicate? I think that this will be helpful because this way, instead of focusing on just stopping a behavior immediately, which I know in the moment is probably first and foremost in a lot of people's minds, I want us to try and understand the message. So kind of the why behind that behavior occurring. If a child had the skills to express or meet a need in a different way, they probably would. People tend to rely on whatever strategies or skills they have that get their needs met as easily, as reliably, and as quickly as possible. So this means that if I need help with something and you typically see me, throwing my body on the ground, yelling and kicking my feet, that's a pretty high effort amount of behavior that I'm engaging in to try and get help. I probably don't have skills or strategies to get that need met in a way that is less effort or easier, more reliable, or more quick. Um, that being said, behavior does communicate a lot of different needs, not just needing help. It could also be that a task is too hard, feeling of overwhelmed, want something, need something, something like my body feeling unsafe. Because of that, it's really helpful to remember that no matter what form the behavior is taking, we're still going to look at it as communication and as it being the person's easiest, most reliable, quickest way of getting that need met in that situation, especially behaviors that we're seeing occur over and over and over. That just means that this is the way that we've learned to get that need met. So I wanted to go over the ABC model of looking at a behavior. So this is the way that I typically look at and communicate why a behavior is occurring. And it's a tool that we use to look for patterns. So looking at one instance of a behavior, although it can be very helpful, doesn't give nearly as much information as looking at the pattern of behaviors that are occurring over and over. So when we want to look at a pattern, what we need to look at is what is occurring immediately before, or the antecedent for the behavior, and then what is also occurring immediately after, or the consequence of the behavior. Both of these are going to be some sort of change to the environment. So the A, or antecedent, would be something that changes right before that behavior occurs. This could be I'm walking through a store and I see a lollipop. It could be somebody telling me that I have to go and put my coat on. It could be something that isn't necessarily even stated by a person in my environment. Something like I'm looking outside and I see that the sun is going down, so I'm anticipating bedtime is about to happen. Um, the behavior itself would be what the person is doing in that situation. So when we talk about behavior, we like to try and be objective and stick with things that are observable, measurable. So this would be like in the example I gave before, if I fall down to the ground and I'm kicking my feet, you can see me fall down. You could, you know, time how long I'm kicking my feet for, count how many times I fall down, something like this. Now, I'm not saying that I expect you to do that. It's just something to keep in mind. If it's something that you can observe or something that you could measure, then that would be a behavior that we would want to try and look for this cause and effect with. The consequence, or the C in this ABC model, is whatever happens after. So this would be essentially the way that the behavior that I engaged in changed my environment. This could be being handed a lollipop. It could be maybe being told by the teacher that I can go out into the hallway instead of being in the classroom, whatever it is. Sometimes the things that happen after a behavior are things that are reinforcing or rewarding. Sometimes there's things that are punishing or not necessarily very desirable. Whatever it is, it'll be some sort of change that happens in my environment because of that behavior I engaged in. Trying to get this to move forward. Thank you for your patience. Okay, there we go. All right. So as I was saying, behavior as communication is the model that we refer to. Um, this is kind of just an outline of why that ABC model is so important. So looking at the triggers or the antecedents, the A, and that consequence or the change that happens because of the behavior, probably brings to mind the question of, well, why do sometimes behaviors occur over and over? And sometimes you might see somebody engage in a behavior and then it seems to just kind of fall away and they don't do it again. Every time that a want or a need arises, this little flow chart essentially plays through. So a child wants or needs something. In order to get that, some behavior. It might be vocally asking for something, it might be engaging in challenge behavior, whatever that behavior is, it will either meet the need or it will not meet the need. If the behavior I engage in meets my needs, I'm going to keep doing that behavior. Um, Essentially, what that means is just I engaged in a behavior, it paid out. Now I learned how to get that need met. It's repeating doing it again. I might try different strategies. I will probably only try different strategies if they are either going to get the need met faster, get the need met easier, or going to get the need met more reliably. Kind of how I touched on that before. Those are some of those three big things that kind of help determine whether or not a new behavior is going to be more desirable for me to engage in or not. I always like to think of it as people tend to want to work smarter, not harder. So if I can, instead of having to throw myself on the ground and wave my body around for 5 minutes, if I can just say, I want a cookie and you'll hand me a cookie, I'm probably going to say, give me that cookie. Um, that being said, I might try other behaviors until I get to that point. So, kind of going back to this chart, if a behavior occurs and does not meet the need, that's when I'm going to probably start trying out new things. I'm going to go, okay, so I tried this, it didn't give me what I wanted. What can I try again next time? That is an excellent time for us to intervene and model a desirable behavior and then give that reward right away. By paying attention to the triggers and to the changes that a behavior is connected with, we'll be able to find these opportunities a little bit more quickly and easily, and we'll be able to identify what those rewards could be that would most benefit and help us make sure that the person is getting their needs met in the safest and most sustainable way possible. So I've kind of been talking and hinting around how there's different needs that need to be met. Um, while these specific needs can be vast and varied, they tend to fall into one of these four different categories. So again, I'd like to stress all behavior does have a purpose. Behavior is communication, and observing one or maybe even a couple instances of it might make it just seem kind of chaotic, and you might not immediately be able to identify what that cause or what that trigger or what that um, consequence or that intended want or need is. But by observing and keeping these in mind, it'll kind of help us figure out which box to put it in a little bit more quickly. So the common functions break down to wanting something, which we call the tangible function. So that would be wanting like a toy or an activity, something that I could deliver to a person, essentially. Wanting connection. So this would be like social attention, wanting, a hug from mom or wanting to talk to someone, have someone talk to me, something like this. Um, Getting away from something. So this would be an escape or avoidance. This could be needing a break. This could be a demand being placed on me or an instruction being given to me that's too difficult, or that I would have to use skills that I'm not very strong with yet in order to get done. Or the fourth function is what we call the sensory function, which is things that help regulate the body. Another way that this function is referred to is by calling it automatically reinforcing. So this would be anything that in and of itself is rewarding. So things like eating, sleeping, a nice warm blanket on a cold day, all of these are things that could potentially serve an automatic or a sensory function. Additionally, it could be things like lights being turned down if they're too bright, things like this. Um, Another important caveat related to this is that a behavior that looks really similar could sometimes, in some situations, fall under one function and other times fall under a different function. We especially can see this sometimes when a person is starting to grow skills and they kind of recycle behaviors that they've tried before in different contexts to see if it applies in this new context as well. So again, just really paying attention not only to the behavior itself, but to finding that trigger, finding that change in the environment before and after. That's going to be how we see that pattern. And that'll give us a lot of really helpful information for determining what we think the real message behind that behavior is, which will be helpful for figuring out ways to help support the individual. So next, I want to talk a little bit more about prevention strategies that reduce burnout. So one of the first things I want to touch on is just that for reducing burnout, prevention is typically more powerful than reaction. So here I just kind of have an escalation cycle laid out. So starting from a feeling of calm, the trigger, that antecedent, up through agitation. So that might be like somebody starting to pace, somebody's voice tone changing, the person starting to be a little frustrated. Acceleration would just be an increase in intensity of those behaviors, or possibly shifting to behaviors that are more unsafe. Peak would be like a full tantrum, full meltdown, more of a like a crisis mode feeling situation. So from there, we have to go all the way down through de-escalation, all the way down through post-crisis depletion until we get to recovery. On the other hand, if we focus on trying to incorporate some strategies that either reduce or remove the trigger, or that somehow help to prevent us from moving up through agitation into acceleration, getting closer to that peak, we save a lot of energy, because coming back down from that is a lot shallower of a dip than coming all the way back down from peak. So because of that, I wanted to talk about some things that we can do to help prevent us getting that far through the escalation cycle. One of the first things that I typically recommend is looking strategically at ways that we can reduce demands. I like to throw in a very, very important piece that interlocks with this. I don't expect this instruction or demand reduction to be permanent. I think that reducing demand strategically can really help create space in which we can help teach skills and help a person grow coping strategies. Once those are in place and those are more solid and we're able to replicate those engagement and those behaviors that are safer, then I would definitely encourage people to start to increase demand load again, or start to increase those instructions again. But in the short term, I feel like it's definitely important to look at ways that we can strategically reduce these demands. So some of the things that I would invite people to consider would be shortening tasks. This wouldn't mean telling a person they don't have to do any of their homework. I'm not going to try and say that it would be something like that. But instead of having somebody sit and complete an entire 15-minute task all at once, we could look at ways to, maybe break it up. So maybe we do 5 minutes and then 5 minutes later and 5 minutes later, something like that, whatever amount of time the person is demonstrating that they're able to safely engage. I also recommend very, very clear expectations. So this goes above and beyond just stating vocal instruction. This would be incorporating, like I have for the third point, some sort of visual support, perhaps, explaining the instruction more thoroughly if that's something that's helpful for the individual. I like to use like measurable options. So, like if we're working on, again, homework, it's one of those things that comes up a lot. So, it's probably going to be a lot of my examples. Instead of saying, we're going to work on math, it's going to be, we're going to work on math for 3 minutes before our break. We're going to work on, finishing 2 math problems, whatever it would be, 10 math problems, wherever the person is at. We're going to read 2 pages of this book before we get up, something like that, where there's that specific number, that specific expectation. It really helps to demonstrate that this probably non-preferred task isn't lasting forever. There is an end, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, there's an end in sight. And these other strategies for reducing demands will also help to drive that home. So for visual supports, I like to use things like work break time cards. So bringing somebody over to a place that they're going to be working on something. There can just be a card that says, homework time, sit down. We have 3 minutes to work on homework, work on our homework. When we're done, flip the visual support over. And now it's break time. I'm telling you it, you're seeing it. These things are helpful. Other ways that visual supports can really shine would be using things like a visual schedule to help a person anticipate like a first, then next, or whatever the steps they'll be going through throughout their day would be. This can either be pictures or pictures in writing or writing, whatever the level the person is at. Just something so that there's that reference. And I love using these types of supports because not only are they a great reference, but they can really help to start increasing independence and autonomy because I'm not reliant on somebody else to keep reminding me what comes next. I can check myself too. So it's helpful for me to know where I'm at, and it's also helpful for me to kind of start looking at my own behavior and realizing what the steps I'm going to have to go through to successfully complete a task or my day are. And then the fourth one here, which I cannot say how helpful this one has been. This is probably of the four, I feel like this is definitely a biggie. Breaks before frustration. Getting a break when you are frustrated, great. Getting a break before you're frustrated so you don't even start going up that slope, fantastic. Again, I'm not going to say that this is forever. I'm not going to say that, I'm going to offer somebody a break every 3 seconds for their whole life. But if that's where we're at right now, okay, that's fine. Because you know what? That 3 second of work before you need a break is going to turn to 4 or 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. We'll get there. But for now, we need to be in a place where we are safe, we are ready to learn, and we are supporting success from an appropriate starting point, an individualized appropriate starting point. So going hand in hand with this, like I said on the previous slide, one of those big reasons for that demand reduction is so that we can create some space so that we can teach replacement skills. Behaviors, because they serve a purpose, are not going to just magically go away. In order for a behavior to just magically go away, we would have to be in some sort of universe where whatever need it was that the behavior was serving just stops existing. That's not going to happen because if I was tantruming because I really, really, really want to go to Taco Bell, then you know what? I'm going to still really, really want to go to Taco Bell next week or next month. Um, the only way that I'm going to stop tantruming is going to be if I have a way that will get that need met more reliably, more quickly, more easily. A great way to do that is to teach me a replacement skill. So, great examples of that would be asking for help, requesting a break, waiting skills. So, like I was talking about, how we might need to do that break before we get frustrated at a really short amount of time for now. Well, after we do that for a while and the person is doing well with it, start increasing that time very slowly. Don't jump from 3 seconds to 3 hours or anything, but very slowly continue to increase it. We're we're practicing waiting. In those situations, you can even start praising the person after the fact. You did such a great job waiting. Start pairing that language. It'll help reassure that when you hear the horrible W word, wait, it doesn't mean forever. And with repeated practice and support, it'll get easier. We just have to believe that it will and keep practicing, and it will. um, Also, emotional labeling is something that I like to use a lot. Again, leaning into that increasing independence and helping to increase autonomy. If we get to a place where I can tell somebody, I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting mad, I'm whatever it is, I'm in the yellow zone or the red zone. Um, there's so many different ways to approach emotional labeling skills and so many great ways to approach it. But if I get to a place where I can start expressing that as like a specific emotion, a zone, whatever it would be, um, that can be a signal to my support system around me. You know what? I think she does need a break, even if I'm not in a place where I can ask for it. Or, okay, I guess she needs help, even if I'm not in a place where I can ask for it. Um, so all four of these really go very hand in hand. And I feel like what replacement skills specifically you leaned into is really going to depend a lot on the individual. When picking ways to address these, I highly, highly, highly recommend keeping in mind that we're going to want to start with something that isn't a big leap, that isn't a big, frustrating mountain that we have to climb to try and teach these replacement skills. So, when looking for like a communication modality or like a way that we can help a person learn to express these things, I would say look for behaviors that the person can already engage in really reliably and shape those to be the beginning of our communication journey. So, for instance, if a person is good at identifying pictures and pointing, maybe we start with a picture system and then we add in, vocal language later if they're a vocal communicator. If a person is already really, really readily vocally communicating, maybe we lean into that and we do vocal communication. If a person's reading, maybe we use like a text-based system and present, cards for them to read and remind themselves what the words that they need to say to get their need met are. These are all going to depend a lot on the person that you're supporting and a way that you feel will be the least dramatic of a change from skills that they're already engaging in. And then from there, again, once we have this going, let's keep building. Keep working on that independence, keep working on growing those skills, bigger, better, more independent. So building regulation before crisis. Um, I think I touched briefly on coping skills as another method for working on replacement skills. So for these, I would say movement breaks, sensory input, predictable routines, and visual schedules are all very helpful. Um, these can be incorporated at a lot of different points throughout a person's day, but I definitely encourage using them not only if a person is starting to become frustrated with the task, but before. So, kind of circling back to what we said with that escalation, de-escalation slope graph that I showed earlier, or chart that I showed earlier, reducing burnout is going to be most successful if we are trying to intervene before behaviors are getting too intense or challenging behaviors are getting too far up that curve. So this might look like if there's times of day where afterwards a person tends to maybe engage in a little bit more of these unsafe behaviors more routinely, I would say back the clock up to before that, and maybe that becomes a great time of day to do some yoga or have some other type of movement break. Um, Maybe have visual schedules that are embedded in the environment that are available around the clock so that even when a person is calm, they're still seeing and anticipating and getting ready for what's going to happen later that day, tomorrow, whatever it would be. Um, which also falls into predictable routines. Visual schedules to help predict routines, fantastic. I would also say having, even if it's not the entire day, because I know that that's not really a realistic goal to have an entire day where everything always happens exactly the same, but having a couple of different times throughout the day where things do happen in a really reliable way can really help to make the whole rest of that day feel a little bit easier. So that might look like having the same 3 to 5 steps that we do every morning when we wake up, or the same bedtime routine that we do every night before we go to bed. Things like that just kind of have a little bit of extra comfort and can help us navigate through challenging situations a little bit more because we can anticipate what different parts of our day will look like, even if it is only a few like monuments during the day, a few checkpoints during the day. Because I know sometimes life is chaotic, so we can't always have everything be perfect stepwise.
Did have a question in
The
the chat.
child's nonverbal.
Yeah, you got
Yep.
it.
Sorry, I just had to finish my thought. I would never get back to it. Yes, so if the child is nonverbal, I definitely would say that I still encourage trying to come up with a different way of communicating. It won't necessarily be vocal communication or text based or maybe even picture based at first, and it'll probably be more guided. But I would say look for a behavior that the child's already able to engage in. So if they typically will like accept hand guidance, or if there's a specific like place that the person goes in their room or in the house to ask for something, where that seems to be a precursor to starting to engage in these challenging behaviors, um, I would say look for those cues, and we're going to try and intervene immediately there instead of letting the person starting to get frustrated. So in those situations, I like to use things like embedded visuals. So let's say I'm working with somebody who's nonverbal, and one of the things that one of the needs that often needs to be met is the person really wants snacks from the kitchen. Something that comes up a lot for everybody, right? So in order to ask for snacks, maybe the person goes into the kitchen and then has a tantrum or has a meltdown. So in this situation, I would say trying to take some sort of communication cards or communication visuals of some sort and embed them in the kitchen so that the person can go to that spot. You'll follow them in there, touch the card, here's your snack. Um, from there, you could even have caregivers have like a copy of the same communication cards or pictures with them. Otherwise, if it's somebody who's nonverbal but has a pretty strong emerging like imitation repertoire, where like if I make a motion or uh, something shape with my hands and the person pretty readily copies it, then I would encourage maybe looking into starting to incorporate a couple of simple like ASL signs as a way of encouraging a person to communicate. At first, it would probably be a situation where looking at that trigger and being aware of those consequences and figuring out what the current behavior is trying to communicate. And then when the person is in a situation where you anticipate that trigger will present, model the behavior as soon as they copy or even do any approximation of what that behavior would be. For instance, signing more, something like this, help, any approximation of what you're showing them, reward it, build on it from there, keep working towards more independent and closer approximations of that behavior until that person is engaging in that communication mode a little bit more independently. The child has can you clarify that question? Sorry.
Pathological demand for avoidance or autonomy. Have you heard of it?
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate the
Hmm.
clarification. Thank you.
No problem.
So in situations like that, I would say we're definitely going to have to lean hard into um, demand reduction to create a lot of space before we're going to be able to start trying to teach some of these skills. And I would also encourage, depending on the child's other skill set, this is hard without
Leanne
having a
and
specific person, but depending on the child's other skill set, I would say it might be a situation where we could start looking at potentially doing some behavior contracting.
yeah.
So laying out an example of these are types of behaviors that will pay out for these situations. These are types of behaviors that will not.
Hmm.
Maybe using, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Um, Again, it depends on the specific skill set, but that's something that I also love to incorporate because it does help to do mul- multiple of these
Reinforce them.
things,
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
clarify
Reinforce.
expectations, shorten
Hmm.
tasks, and visual supports. Kind of a threefer if you're
Yeah.
using behavioral contracting. Um, Now, I'm not saying that we're going to, write down a couple of rules and the person's going to go perfect and immediately follow them,
Hmm.
but starting very small with things that we feel are more of a sure get, I would say can be a great way to get the ball rolling with a behavioral contracting scenario.
Hmm.
Um, and by behavioral contracting, I mean exactly what it sounds like. I'm writing out a contract that shows this behavior pays for this behavior does not, whatever it would
Hmm.
be. So, an example might be saying, if you do your chores every day this week, I will give you $5, something like that.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't have to be what the contract is for, of course. It can be for a variety of smaller
Hmm.
things, and especially if it's somebody who does have more of a demand avoidance diagnosis or neurology, I would say you're going to want to start smaller. Um, and then as you're able, continue to build.
Hmm.
Um, if a situation arises where you are working through trying to build skills and you feel like you're hitting a point where it's starting to get rocky again, I would always encourage people go back to what was working. So if a shorter duration was working, go back to that, stay there for a little bit while, then keep trying to build from there. Um, I would rather have somebody doing an approximation of something very well and very successfully, and everybody's calmer and
Yeah.
the stress is coming down than having a situation where we're reaching for the moon and falling short and everybody's pulling their hair out because we're in a situation where things are getting rocky and we're
Hmm.
dealing with working through a lot of crises. I hope that helped to address your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Okay. So another way of kind of trying to look at this, I want us to be spending a lot more energy on connection, skill building, and calm moment support than on having to correct behavior. This is going to be a great way to help support not being in a situation where we're experiencing a lot of burnout. Um, so exactly specifically what this will look like for each family or each caregiver will be a little different, and that's okay. Because if at the end of the day you're saying, yeah, I feel like there was more opportunities for skill building today, I feel like those steps that I've been taking are starting to produce that space that we need, those calm moments that we need, great. um, I would say celebrate that and keep striving to increase the instructions, increase the expectations as you're able to, and as the person's demonstrating that they're ready. Okay. So I kind of wanted to touch base too on during escalation, what happens. So if we're trying to make sure that we're focusing a lot of our efforts on intervening before somebody is in like a behavioral crisis mode, it's going to be really good to start looking at patterns of early signs that indicate this person's probably headed towards an escalation. So these can be things like starting to sound frustrated, maybe body tensing, changing the way that I'm walking. Eye contact changes can be another one, increased pacing. The list for these early signs kind of goes on, and it'll probably fall a lot on observing, watching for those patterns. If you're a caregiver of somebody that engages in challenging behavior, you probably already know some of these early signs. Um, and I definitely know that it can be a little bit stressful watching for them because we're probably so used to seeing these and being like, oh, I know where this is going. It doesn't have to go there. And hopefully, by implementing some of these strategies, we can keep it from going there. We can cut this off at early signs. We can help a person lean into skills that we're starting to try and teach, and we can move past a lot more quickly. That being said, if we do get to a situation where somebody is highly escalated, there are a couple of tips and tricks that I like to always encourage people to try and remember. So in these situations, additional language or additional instructions might feel like they would be supportive because they would be spelling out exactly what you need the person to do or clarifying for the person in the moment. But if somebody is in a situation where they're already engaging in a meltdown, headed towards that crisis situation, I would say instead, let's try to lower our voice, speak calmly, reduce extra language, decrease demands, and this will hopefully help ensure safety, in addition to ensuring safety by monitoring the environment, just being aware of anything that could potentially be harmful around us. This is highly related to, or this is very integrated with the fact that in a situation where your brain or your body are already feeling overloaded, that extra language, even when it's meant to be supportive and the person saying it means well, is just a lot of extra information that we have to process through when there's already so much going on with our body. I would also include inviting people to avoid things like lecturing or getting caught up in arguments as much as you can. Also, threatening consequences is often not supportive. I know that again, it comes from a place of like trying to clarify, if you do this, this bad thing is going to happen. But in that moment, there's already so much going on in the person's head that kind of piling on with other negative situations is going to be doing a little bit more harm than good in that situation. So just some food for thought there. And then after the storm, or once we've gotten back to that place of calm, definitely going through that validation of feelings, problem solving together as much as the person is able to with you, practicing replacement skills, and just working to repair that connection is something that is very supportive for not only the child, but I feel the caregiver as well. I feel like whenever I'm working with somebody and we, go through something together, just being able to exist and be okay and do something fun after and kind of change the script and put some more good memories there is helpful for me and for them as well, because I obviously don't want the person to associate me with negative feelings any more than they have to. Again, what this looks like will be very different person to person, and that is completely okay. Oh, I also like to mention the caveat. This is something that I've been seeing more of a trend in some of the literature, the scientific literature as well, kind of differentiating between meltdowns and tantrums. So often meltdowns are not goal oriented, they're more related to like a loss of regulation or a nervous system overload. So in those situations, the behaviors are going to look as if they're serving that function of the sensory or that automatic, the body feelings. So it's just something to kind of be aware of as well. I know that sometimes when someone's engaging in behaviors, it can feel like they're trying to manipulate you, or what they're doing is always goal oriented. It's not always the case. So I just want us to be mindful of that when we are looking for those patterns and trying to figure out the best supports that we can put in place for someone. Okay, wanted to touch on a few more points related to protecting yourself from burnout. So first, burnout is real. I just want to be very crystal clear about that. I know that sometimes it can feel like saying you're feeling burned out or you're feeling like you're headed towards burnout is difficult to express. And burnout can take a lot of different, it can appear in a lot of different ways. It can take a lot of different forms. So it could be like an emotion exhaustion. It could be being more irritable. Sometimes just feeling ineffective, just feeling like, I tried everything, nothing's working, those kind of hopeless feelings, or just no longer taking joy in some of the things that you used to. All of those are definitely symptoms of burnout. And that is okay. But if we are able to be mindful of that and keep those types of ideas in mind, it can help us kind of do a little self-check and see, where we're at and try and figure out if we need to look for some strategies to kind of help refill those batteries. Hopefully before we get to feeling fully burned out. Some of the strategies that I encourage would be setting realistic expectations, taking things one day at a time, picking our battles, using visual supports to reduce arguing. I feel like arguing is one of those things that always drains my batteries twice as fast as pretty much any other behavior that I try to intervene with. So everything that we can do to just avoid falling into that argument trap will probably really help keep those batteries charged. Building predictable routines. I know that I was doing a lot of talking about how anticipating things that will happen next, or having those like monuments throughout the day that help us gauge what's going to happen and keep everything predictable, is great for a child. It's also great for a caregiver. I know that me personally, there are days where I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, okay, when does bedtime routine start? Because I'm starting to get tired. So just being able to have that time where I know that as soon as it hits this time, these are going to be the steps that happen. It's predictable. I do it every day is great on my end too. And then I also encourage taking micro breaks. I know that sometimes we feel like sitting down and taking a full break is something that's not always easy throughout a day, especially if we're, a sole caregiver for a period of time, something like that. But even like taking a couple of seconds where we're taking a sip of coffee and just really trying to think about the way it tastes and smells and the way our body feels in that moment, things like that. It can take, 30 seconds to a minute, maybe less, depending on how much time we have to spare. But things like that, where we just try and be in the present, can really help to delay or prevent burnout as well. Co-regulate. I always like to try and remind caregivers that your nervous system matters too. If there's ways for you to step away safely, I would encourage you to do so from time to time. Breathing before responding is something that is not only protective for us, but can also help us speak calmly, reduce extra language, and pick our words very, very carefully in situations that might be a little bit tense. I know that it's something that I do often. I'll take a breath, count to 3, exhale, then say what I was going to say. I also encourage scripting phrases ahead of time. So just kind of practicing on your own time. If there's things that you want to say in a specific way repeatedly, whenever a situation arises, the more practice that we do for building our skills, the easier they'll be in situations where, you see those agitation behaviors start, those like pre-escalating behaviors start, and sometimes you get that little jolt of adrenaline and you start feeling that nervous, tight chest, whatever specific feelings your body goes through. But in those situations, if it's a phrase or a small short script that you've said to yourself over and over and over, like a little mantra, it's going to be a lot easier to say it in that situation where you're stressed out. And also just use support systems. I know a lot of people have trouble asking for help, or a lot of people feel like maybe they don't deserve to ask for help. Well, I want to say you do, and you can. And with practice, it'll get easier to ask for help. But I definitely encourage, if you have those support systems, use them. And if not, then I'm hoping that there are ways for you to seek out support. All right. I would say choose safety anytime that this choice comes up. So sometimes the goal is just going to be surviving a grocery trip or whatever your grocery trip specific situation is, not teaching a whole elaborate life lesson. And you know what? That's okay. Like we've been talking about so far with our time together, starting small and working up slowly is going to be a lot better in the short term, and honestly a lot better in the long term, because things that are taught in small steps repeatedly are going to be the things that are going to still be easy to do in 5 years or 10 years or however far down the road. I like to kind of equate this to a situation where we have a person that crammed for an exam and a person that showed up and did the work every day and took the whole class and studied throughout. The person that crammed for the exam might get a good grade on the exam. But if you come back and ask them in a month or 2 or 6, they're probably not going to remember any of those answers or be able to demonstrate any of those skills. The person that showed up every day and learned things little by little, they're going to still be able to show you those skills. They're still going to know that information. And that's going to be a much more meaningful life change than that big all at once cram type approach. Okay. So just kind of wanted to go back a little bit, reflect on some of the things that we've been talking about in our time together. Reframe. So instead of how do I stop this, let's really try and figure out what need is unmet, what skill is missing, what can I change about the environment. These are going to be things that are more immediately actionable, and they're going to be questions we can ask ourselves that open up new ways of going forward. How can I stop this is something that might help that one time immediately in that situation, but it's not going to be the same as trying to figure out those things that set us up for strategies that we can continue to work on to continue to change and eventually will lead to bigger, better, sustainable changes. Okay, so some key takeaways. Prevention reduces burnout. So really focusing hard on things that we can do, environmental changes we can make, skills that we can practice, not only in the moment if we're upset, but beforehand so that we can set ourselves up for success. Those are going to be great ways of really helping a person learn new skills and also a caregiver prevent and hopefully delay as much as possible feeling burned out. Behavior is communication. Always keep this in mind. Sometimes when we see a person engaging in behavior, it looks very chaotic and we might not immediately see what that person is trying to express, but there is something that they're trying to express, and looking for those patterns related to the changes in the environment before and after that person engages in a behavior are going to be great clues for us to figure out what that behavior is trying to communicate. Regulation first, teaching second. So we need to first work on creating that space so that we have those calm moments to teach skills. If somebody's already upset, they're probably not in a good place to learn. Totally understandable. So just making sure that we're setting ourselves up so that those teaching opportunities are happening in moments where we have a better chance of being successful. You matter in the equation, you, the caregiver, as well as the child. I cannot say that enough. Caregivers are powerful, powerful, powerful change agents in people's lives. And that I know can often feel unappreciated, but by seeing the changes that are happening, small, steady, and then eventually we can look back and see how far we've come. I'm hoping that that'll help prove to you that you matter, and you are powerful. And then progress is greater than perfection. Small steps are going to get us to a place a little bit more slowly, but we'll get to a place that's sustainable. I would take that any day over one perfect instance of something happening. Okay, so I also wanted to make sure that I showed that if there are additional questions or comments or anything, please reach out to care@fortahealth.com. That goes to some fantastic people, and they can also ask me about it, whatever the questions may be. There's also a bunch of great free resources through fortahealth.com. So please go there, take a look. We have a place to register for upcoming webinars. There's also a bunch of resources already posted on the site. I highly encourage you to check them out. And then I also just wanted to say thank you so much for your time and attention today. And if there are any other questions, comments, anything that people would like to go over, I am happy to go over them with you. But yeah, thank you. I hope that what we went over today was helpful and encourages people to look at behavior in a little bit different way.